Hi, I'm Alexa, and when I first learned about the Seneca Falls Convention, I was impressed by how brave these women were, being able to stand up to all the men who stood in front of them, speaking out for what's right. It made me think about how, even though they fought so hard 175 years ago, women are still fighting for equal rights now. Women have so many opportunities, but still, we're held back in multiple places that we shouldn't be. I created this documentary because I wanted you to understand the struggles women faced to even get 75% of the rights men have just handed to them. This is where it all started.
Talk a little bit about how the convention came together?
Of course, yeah. So the convention really comes out of the meeting of two women, two names that we mostly know in history: Lucretia Mott of Philadelphia and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton will famously go on with Susan B. Anthony to lead the suffrage movement for about 50 years. But at the time we're talking about, things are just getting started. She hasn't really done anything. She's about 25 years old, and she will travel to London, England in the summer of 1840, actually for her honeymoon with her new husband, Henry Stanton, who coincidentally was a delegate to the World Anti-Slavery Convention.
The World Anti Slavery Convention was an event in London held to abolish slavery around the world. When abolitionists Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton showed up to the convention to participate as delegates, their showing up sparked a day long debate. The organizers of the convention were against them, saying mixed sex conversations went against English customs, and some noted that it was not Christian to let them in. Eventually, the men concluded that the women could stay and watch in the very back, covered by a curtain where they could only listen and not participate.
This will happen the summer of 1840. So the story kind of goes, and there's some changes to this. The two women are walking home from the convention, or they're just out seeing the sights. And as they're walking home, Elizabeth Cady Stanton will turn to Lucretia Mott and say that when we return to America, we must do something for the rights of women. We must have a convention, and we must form a society, an organization to promote this cause going forward. Best we understand it, that is the origin of the first Women's Rights Convention that will happen here 8 years later in 1848.
Can you tell me a little bit about the days leading up to the convention and what happened during it?
Yes. So the days leading up to it is actually fairly quick. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott met in 1840. They don't really, well, they may have met a couple other times. We're not really certain. They definitely stayed in touch. Were pen pals. But summer, when she's here, who kind of should come back into her life, but Lucretia Mott. So Lucretia Mott will come up here July 9th, 1848. Mott and her sister will receive an invitation to a tea party at the home of Jane Hunt, who lives here but was also a Quaker from Philadelphia. Hunt will invite her neighbor, Marianne McClintock, who's also a Quaker from Philadelphia, who'd worked with the two sisters previously. And then she'll invite a woman recommended to her by Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who just moved here the year before. The five women will sit down for tea at the Hunt House, and they will have kind of a social event. The torrent of my discontent will pour forth with such venomous indignation that I'll stir the party and myself to do and dare anything. So that night, the five women will draft up an invitation to a 2-day convention to be held here in Seneca Falls at the Wesleyan Chapel. It'll be The purpose of the convention will be to discuss the social, civil, and religious rights and conditions of the women of America. So after waiting 8 years, now they're going to do all this in 10 days. There's a very specific reason they do it so fast, and that is the presence of Lucretia Mott. Mott does not live here. She's on vacation. She is one of the most famous women in America. She's the draw. So if you're going to do a convention with anybody, it's good to have a celebrity there to pull people in. And finally, one other thing has to happen before the convention. On July 16th, Elizabeth Cady Stanton will meet at the home of Marianne McClintock, who was the final woman at the tea party with Jane Hunt. She's kind of a kinswoman to Jane Hunt, Quaker from Philadelphia. She will meet with McClintock and McClintock's two adult daughters, and they will sit down and plan the convention. The McClintocks are a pretty active abolitionist family, do a lot of work in a whole bunch of different realms. But here, Marianne, the mother, and the two daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, will help Elizabeth Cady Stanton draft kind of a public statement for the convention. And we know that today is the Declaration of Sentiments. The bulk of the Declaration of Sentiments, just to be clear, is largely a list of complaints or grievances. At this time, a sentiment was a type of grievance. So a Declaration of Sentiments is where they get the title. At the end of the document will be a concluding sentence. They'll say, what are we going to do about it? And of course, they're going to form a society, an organization. They're going to raise money, hire agents, publish documents in newspapers. They'll petition Congress, petition the state houses, and do all these things to get their ideas acted upon. They're kind of given a blueprint of what they're going to do next.
What happened during the Seneca Falls Convention?
The convention will then take place on July 19th and July 20th. The bulk of the convention, both the first day where it's just women, the second day where it's men and women both, the bulk of the mornings will be dealt going through the Declaration of Sentiments, word by word, line by line, looking for changes and edits and all these different things. So that'll be the bulk of the work they do at the convention. On the second day, they will vote on it and approve it as the official statement of what they're going to do. There's going to be some speeches at different times. The first day, yes, it's exclusively women. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, the one daughter of McClintock, Elizabeth McClintock, will speak. A letter from Martha Coffin Wright will be read, a variety of things like that. The second day, it's actually both Stanton and Mott and some leading men in town who will give their 2 cents or that type of stuff. 10 of these 11 resolutions will pass unanimously with no debate. No one has anything to say. They're like, yep, great, everyone votes for it, no problem. Next, move on. One will not. The one that does not deals with a very specific issue, and I'm sure you'll probably guess what it is: a woman's right to
Vote.
Yeah, of course. A beautiful moment where Frederick Douglass of Rochester, the famed abolitionist who was personally invited to the convention, had spoken earlier. He will rise and he'll give an off-the-cuff answer to whether or not we fight for the vote or not. And he will argue you have to start with a vote. With a vote, you can elect your leaders. With elected leaders, you can change your laws. Without it, you can't. And they will compromise, and women will sign it first, men will sign it second. So 68 women, 32 men, 100 names will go on the document.
Why was women getting the right to vote such an important turning point in history?
It's important at a most fundamental level because it gave women the ability to have a voice in the laws that they were governed by, right? Women this was one of the main arguments that suffrage activists were making from the beginning of the suffrage movement in the 1840s, that women are human beings and American citizens and therefore should have the right to have a voice in the laws and that govern them and the government that they live under. And so that's a big reason why the right to vote is important for anyone, not just for women, but for all people, to have an equal ability to sort of make your political preferences known at the voting booth is incredibly important.
Not everyone agreed with giving women the right to vote.
Obviously, there are people who are opposed to giving women the right to vote. Not all those people are men. There were some prominent women anti-suffragists. One that I sort of tell students about a lot is a woman named Catherine Beecher, who was one of the most famous women in 19th century America. She was from this prominent family. She was an anti-suffragist her entire life. She didn't feel that voting in politics was an appropriate space for women. And so she didn't support women's right to vote.
Why did women have the right to vote in some states before the 19th Amendment?
Yeah, this happens in a lot of different ways. So there's a handful of states in the Mountain West, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho, who give women the right to vote between the sort of late 1860s and the early 1890s. And they're giving women full voting rights. Women can vote for everything there. After Colorado gives women the right to vote, no new state gives women full suffrage rights until about 1910. So after the early 1890s, there's this real drop in full suffrage. And what starts happening in some places is they start giving women what's called partial suffrage.
Did all women get the right to vote before the 19th Amendment?
Even when the 19th Amendment passes, it doesn't enfranchise all women. Those white women in Alabama were correct. Black women are still under Jim Crow disfranchisement laws. With certain categories of immigrants at the time, mostly Asian immigrants, were not allowed to become citizens, no matter how long they'd been here, and so they couldn't vote. So there are still sort of categories of women who it takes longer than 1920 for them to get that right.
How has women's participation in nationwide elections changed politics?
In general, the most basic change is what I sort of spoke to a minute ago. You have twice as many people that you have to convince. The politicians still tended to really think about like women as a single voting bloc, like that all women would vote the same. By the end of the 1920s, they figured out that's not true. And then the parties sort of, especially the Democratic Party, is an early adopter here, and the Republicans are doing this by the 1940s, sort of pivot to just thinking about women as voters like any other voter. Women are involved in the party structures, but they're not being targeted as like a swing voting bloc until the 1940s. And then in the 1940s, both because in 1944, during World War II, women are the majority of voters because so many men are deployed. And so throughout the 40s and into the 50s, they're sort of thinking about women as voters, and then that goes away again a little bit until sort of the 60s and 70s when feminist activists sort of again are focusing on women voters as a voting bloc. And then that stayed sort of consistent ever since.
The Seneca Falls Convention was just the spark. Years later, women are still fighting for equal rights. Women have succeeded in acquiring necessary rights, but some rights are yet to be gotten. Let's take a look at what women have achieved and what still isn't equal in our world today. Why has unequal pay been a prominent issue when there are laws against it?
So the Equal Pay Act passes in 1963. And the Equal Pay Act of 1963 says that it's illegal to pay men and women differently for the same job. And what we see is that especially in jobs that have been gendered as female jobs for a long, 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 long time, I'm thinking like teachers, nurses, clerical workers, those jobs, less so nurses, but like teachers and clerical workers, like we can see the moment in the 19th century when those jobs feminize, when they switch from being jobs that men did to jobs that women did. And part of the explicit argument by the people that are paying those women at that time is, oh, they're women, we can pay them less. Teachers are paid a lot less than any traditionally male job that requires an equivalent educational level. And so that gap is what accounts for a lot of the persistence of the gender pay gap, is the persistence of the sex segregation in the labor market, the persistence of paying jobs that are gendered female less than jobs that are gendered male. And we haven't really come up with another way of fixing it because it is so tied to the jobs that men and women still tend to take because of the way that those jobs are gendered.
What are the biggest factors that contribute to the gender pay gap today?
We see this really egregiously with like daycare workers or like home health aides. These are jobs that are really underpaid for how important they are to society. But they are jobs that a lot of people see as just what women naturally do. If a couple have children, and if that family decides that one of them is going to step out of the workforce when the children are small, it is overwhelmingly likely that that's going to be the woman. Not always, but for the most part, that's going to be the wife if it's a heterosexual couple. And there is a ton of evidence that shows that those gaps in your career trajectory hold down your overall lifetime earning.
What are some groups that fought for equal pay?
There was a woman named Lily Ledbetter, and she found out decades after the fact that she had started at a different starting salary than the men at the factory that she worked in Northern Alabama. It was a clear, like she was doing the same job. It was a clear violation of the Equal Pay Act. Every court said that she had waited too long to bring it up. There was like a time limit. And so Congress actually had to go and pass a law. It's called the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay or Fair Pay Act that took that time limit off. That like if at any time you become aware of a violation of the Equal Pay Act where you were underpaid because of your sex, you can go sue your employer for back pay, regardless of if it was 40 years from now or 40 years ago. I will also say the actress Michelle Williams found out that she was getting paid like 10, like 20 times less than the male lead in a movie for what they call reshoots. Like when they were editing the movie together, they were like, hey, we need you guys back for like 2 more days to reshoot some scenes for how we're editing this. And she was getting like the union minimum, like the SAG-AFTRA minimum, and he was getting like $1 million a day. And she was very vocal about that. Like I said, like maybe 6 years ago, somewhere in there. Um, so that's another example. Those are a couple examples that I can think of.
How did not having the right to own property limit women's responsibilities and independence?
And this is something that starts like with English people coming to North America because this is a part of English common law that they brought with them. And it's a set of all of the rules governing women's rights under English common law are broadly under this category of laws called coverture laws. If you read the Declaration of Sentiments, they talk about coverture a lot in that document. And I think it's in there that they first refer to it as civil death. Because what happens under coverture is that a married woman, when she marries, she loses her independent legal personhood. She ceases to exist in the eyes of the law. She is covered by her husband. She has no independent financial ability at all. And so it's incredibly limiting on women's independence, on their decision making, on their lives.
How has women's right to own property changed their role in society and in families?
So, I mean, it's game changing, right? Because it undoes everything I talked about a few minutes ago. Now you can make choices for yourself. You can have the money to leave if you need to. You can be your own business owner. You can, sort of use your skills in a commercial way. You can make choices independent of your husband, even if you're not leaving him. If you just disagree about how to manage the money, you can sort of have your own money and do your own thing. And so it's just as debilitating as it was to not have any of it, having it is totally game changing in terms of women's independence.
The women of Seneca Falls planted a seed for change in 1848, but their vision for equality is still unfinished. My hope is that this documentary inspires people to continue the fight for equal rights, no matter how difficult it is. If change was possible back then, it's still possible now. Equality is not just their fight from the past, it's ours for the future.